April 15th, 1989. A sun-drenched afternoon in Sheffield. On paper, it was a perfect match. Liverpool versus Nottingham Forest. Two titans of English football fighting for a place in the FA Cup final. But in just 6 minutes, the cheers of a sold-out stadium would turn into a silence that would haunt the British sport for the next 30 years. Exactly 364 days earlier, these two titans had met in this exact same round. Liverpool walked away 2-1 winners that day, so the 1989 rematch was one of the most anticipated games of the decade. To understand the scale of this, you have to understand what these two teams were. Liverpool in 1989 were the kings of England. Much like the dominant side we've seen in recent years under Jurgen Klopp, they weren't just winning, they were consistently challenging for every trophy in Europe. On the other side, Nottingham Forest were led by the legendary Brian Clough. They were a massive force in the 80s, stacking European trophies back to back. The stars were aligned here for a classic. The venue chosen was Hillsborough Stadium, the home of Sheffield Wednesday. It was a storied ground that had hosted countless finals before, but Hillsborough carried a fatal flaw, common to many 1980 stadiums, an aging design that was built for a completely other era. Like most grounds at the time, Hillsborough featured large standing terraces and fenced pens, literal cages designed to prevent pitch invasions. But the most dangerous part wasn't the fences, it was the lack of crowd control systems. Today we take things like digital turnstiles and sophisticated queuing for granted, but back then it was a math problem with no solution. The Liverpool fans were allocated the Leppings Lane end, a section with cramped entrance and fewer turnstiles. Meanwhile, the Forest fans were given the Spion Kop, which had better access and significantly more space. There had been warnings before. Congestion at the Lepping Lane's end had caused near misses in previous years, but those red flags were just totally ignored, and on this day, the neglect would turn deadly. As 3 p.m. approached, thousands of Liverpool fans were stuck outside the Leppings Lane turnstiles, and the bottleneck was creating a dangerous crush in the streets. Panicking at the sight growing outside, the match commander, David Duckenfield, made the most catastrophic decision in the history of the British sport, and he gave a simple order: open Gate C. When that gate swung open, a massive wave of fans flowed through, but there was no one to direct them to the side pens, which still had plenty of space. Instead, the crowd naturally funneled into the central tunnel, directly behind the goal, an area that was already dangerously full. It's vital that we properly understand what happened next. This wasn't a riot, and it wasn't hooliganism. It was a crowd crush. In physics, when crowd density hits about 6 people per square meter, individuals lose the ability to control their own movement. The crowd begins to act like a fluid under immense pressure. It isn't about people fighting or panicking, it's just the sheer weight of thousands of bodies transferring force forward. The people at the very front weren't trampled, they were compressed. The pressure against the steel fences made it impossible for them to expand their lungs to breathe. In this devastating crush, 97 supporters lost their lives. Hundreds more were left with life-altering injuries. The match was stopped just 6 minutes after kickoff, because as history has shown us, it is never humanly right to kick a ball while people are dying in the stands. Before the victims had even been identified, before the families even knew if their loved ones were coming home, a new narrative was already being built. It was a narrative designed to do one thing: protect the authorities. The cold, hard facts were simple. Police control had totally failed, the gates were open too late, the pens were overcrowded, and the emergency response was shambolically slow. But the South Yorkshire police couldn't let that be the headline. To deflect from their own catastrophic failures, the police began pushing a series of malicious lies. They claimed fans were drunk and violent. They claimed thousands had forced their way into the stadium without tickets. They even went as far to allege that fans were stealing from the dead and physically fighting the very rescuers trying to save their lives. In the rush to be first, the media swallowed the police's lies whole. On April 19th, the Sun newspaper published 3 words that would change the city of Liverpool forever: the truth. Underneath that headline were the fabricated claims of the police, presented as objective fact. It wasn't just bad journalism, it was a hit job. The reaction in Liverpool was instant and permanent. A total boycott of the paper began that day. A boycott that remains so ironclad decades later, you will still struggle to find a single copy of The Sun for sale in the city today. But the cover-up went deeper than the newspapers. It reached into the very heart of the legal system. Internal South Yorkshire police documents were manually edited to downplay officer failures. Key facts about overcrowding and the lack of command were simply deleted. Perhaps most shocking of all, officers lied under oath in the early inquest. They stood in a court of law and swore that fans had forced the gates, knowing full well that it was their own commander who had ordered them opened. By framing the disaster as hooliganism, the authorities weren't just avoiding the blame, they were robbing the 97 victims of their dignity. They turned a mourning city into a scapegoat, starting a 27-year battle for the real truth to finally be heard. For decades, the family of the 97 were trapped by a single number, 3:15 p.m. The original coroner ruled that any evidence from after this time was inadmissible. The logic was cruel as it was arbitrary. They claimed that every victim had received fatal injuries by that moment. By cutting the clock off, the authorities effectively erased the shambolic emergency response from the legal record. They didn't have to explain why paramedics were blocked from the pitch. They didn't have to explain why fans were forced to use advertising boards as makeshift stretchers. By silencing the clock, they silenced the truth. But they didn't count on the Iron Lady of Hillsborough, Anne Williams. Her 15-year-old son Kevin was one of the 97. The official report claimed that Kevin was dead by 3:15. Anne refused to believe it. She spent years hunting for witnesses until she found them. An off-duty nurse and a special constable who both swore Kevin was alive at 4 p.m., nearly an hour after the cutoff. Kevin's last word was Mom. Anne took her fight all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. She became the face of a movement that eventually forced the government to release 450,000 pages of secret documents. Those papers proved that 164 witness statements had been physically edited. Police literally crossed out admissions of their own failures in those reports, replacing them with lies about drunken fans. Tragically, Anne passed away in 2013, and she was just 3 years short of seeing the final victory. But her spirit is the reason the 3:15 barrier was finally shattered. In 2016, the longest jury case in British legal history came to a close. The verdict of accidental death was deleted, and in its place, unlawful killing. The jury ruled that the fans were not to blame. Instead, it was gross negligence manslaughter by the police. After 27 years, match commander David Duckenfield could no longer claim to be a bystander to a tragedy. He was the architect of it. As the verdict was read, the family stood outside the courtroom and sang, "You'll never walk alone." It was a moment where football worked its true magic, proving that even in the darkest of times, the game is more than just a sport. It's a community that refuses to let its own be forgotten. I'm literally getting goosebumps thinking about how football, no matter how much it tears us apart, at the end of the day, it brings us all together. The 97 were no longer drunken hooligans in the eyes of the law. They were victims of a crime. And after 3 decades, they were finally allowed to rest in peace. In 1990, the UK government released the Taylor Report. Its findings were concise and devastating. The disaster wasn't caused by fans. It was caused by total failure in crowd control and an outdated stadium design. This report didn't just suggest changes. It reshaped the entire DNA of English football forever. The most iconic feature of the British game, the standing terrace, was effectively banned in the top 2 divisions. Standing was replaced by seats. Density was reduced, and the caged fences were all torn down. New standards were introduced: stricter capacity math, real-time monitoring, and wider escape routes. But to understand why these changes took so long, we have to look at the shadow of 1985. 4 years before Hillsborough, the world watched the Heysel disaster during a European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus. A charge by Liverpool fans caused a perimeter wall to collapse, killing 39 people, most of them being Juventus supporters. In the eyes of Margaret Thatcher's government, English football fans were no longer spectators. They were a public order threat. The reaction was to treat fans like animals. Stadiums implemented higher fences, heavy police presences, and the very containment pens that would eventually lead to the crush at Hillsborough. For years, the authorities were so obsessed with stopping hooliganism that they completely forgot about human safety. Hillsborough forced a radical shift in mindset. Officials stopped asking, how can we control these people? And started asking, how can we keep everyone safe? The science of crowd density became a priority. Clubs stopped seeing fans as problems, or even just customers, and they began to see them as the most important stakeholders in the game. Today, we have assigned seating, structured ticketing, and the fan liaison role. Officials specifically tasked with communicating crowd issues to the referees in real time. It didn't happen overnight, though, and the cost of these lessons were 97 lives that should have never been lost to begin with. But today, you walk through a turnstile, find your assigned seat, and watch a match without a steel fence between you and the pitch. You're experiencing the legacy of the fight for justice. We can't change the past, but we can ensure that a bad call never costs a single life again. Because at the end of the day, football is just a game, but the people on the stands are everything. Thank you so much for watching this video. Once again, if you made it all the way to the end, I appreciate you so much. See you next time. Peace.